Two teenage girls, humiliated and denied their rightful seats, refused to accept the system's injustice, triggering a corporate crisis that changes everything. Imagine this. You're at the airport, ready for your first solo adventure. The excitement bubbles up inside you. You're about to board a plane, to explore new places, new opportunities. But then, suddenly, everything goes wrong. You're denied boarding, not because of anything you've done wrong, but simply because of the color of your skin. What do you do in that moment? Stay silent, accept the injustice, or fight back? Stay with us to find out how two determined teenage sisters, faced with humiliation and discrimination, make a phone call that doesn't just get them on a plane, it grounds an entire airline and sparks a fight for change. What would you do if you were in their shoes? Have you ever witnessed or experienced unfair treatment while traveling? Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. If you don't want to subscribe, kindly tell us why in the comment section so we know where to improve on. We will love to know. Now, let us begin. Meet Zara and Nia, 17-year-old honor students excited for their first solo trip to visit colleges in Boston. For these bright, ambitious twins, this adventure is a chance to step into their future. But what starts as a thrilling journey quickly spirals into an ordeal they could never have imagined. The stakes? They're higher than they realize, because their father, Marcus Jackson, isn't just any concerned parent watching from the sidelines. He's the newly appointed CEO of Mid-Atlantic Airlines, a role he's kept under wraps. What Zara and Nia don't know is that their father's position will soon be the game changer they never expected, shaping the course of their journey and sparking a corporate crisis that sends shockwaves across the airline industry. Stay with us to see how a routine flight becomes the catalyst for an unprecedented battle against systemic discrimination. The moment Zara and Nia reached the front of the line, something felt off. The gate agent, Trevor, stood there, scanning the crowd, barely acknowledging their presence. For a split second, they exchanged confused glances. Was he really ignoring them? It wasn't the first time something like this had happened, but this time it stung differently. Trevor didn't look at them when they approached the counter. He didn't even make eye contact. His gaze was fixed firmly ahead, as if they didn't exist. A slight shift in their posture, a slight clearing of the throat from Nia, but still, nothing. The line behind them moved, but they were frozen. Zara's heart raced. She could feel the stares from people behind them. Why were they being ignored? Why did they always feel like they were invisible, like their existence didn't matter? The questions raced through her mind as the seconds dragged on. "Next," Trevor finally called out, his voice sharp and dismissive, directed at a white couple that had suddenly appeared behind them. He stepped aside with a friendly smile, welcoming them like old friends. Zara and Nia remained silent, their patience wearing thin, but they said nothing. There was nothing to say, right? This was how it always went. "Excuse me, sir, we were next," Nia spoke up, her voice calm but firm. But Trevor's eyes narrowed, and he stared at them as though their request was an inconvenience. He didn't respond right away, instead continuing to check the couple's tickets. Zara could feel her pulse pounding in her ears. She knew what this was. She had seen it before. It wasn't a mistake. It was something much worse. The feeling was familiar. It had happened countless times, in countless places. The slow-moving waiter who ignored them in favor of others, the teacher who refused to call on them, though they knew the answer, the shopkeeper who followed them around as if they were about to steal something. But here, in this moment, Standing at the gate with first-class tickets in hand, it was impossible to ignore. It was racism, and it wasn't a one-off incident. It was happening again. The twins exchanged a look, both of them silently acknowledging what was happening, but neither said a word. They had been taught, from a young age, that speaking out too loudly could make things worse. They had learned that their anger would be seen as aggression, their frustration as entitlement. It was a hard lesson to swallow, but it was one they'd learned all too well. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Trevor glanced at their boarding passes with exaggerated disbelief. "First class?" he said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Are you sure you're at the light counter?" His words hung in the air like a challenge, as if they didn't deserve the seats they had been given. Zara's patience was wearing thin, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes, our father purchased these tickets for us," she explained, her hands gripping the counter, trying to steady herself. "We're traveling to Boston to visit colleges." Trevor picked up their boarding passes, turning them between his fingers as if they were counterfeit. "These don't look right," he muttered, his eyes scanning the tickets. "Where did you get these?" Zara's heart sank, but she held her ground. "Our father bought them directly from the airline. There's no issue." He looked at the tickets like they were dirty, then flicked them back onto the counter with a sneer. "I'll need to verify these," he said dismissively. "Wait here." As he disappeared behind the desk, the twins stood motionless, their minds racing. What had just happened? Why were they being treated like criminals when all they wanted to do was board a plane? And why did it feel like they were the ones being punished for something they had no control over? They stood there for what felt like hours. The line behind them continued to move. Other passengers were processed, with smiles, pleasantries, and simple exchanges. But not them, not the twins. The minutes passed, and each one felt like an eternity. "Do you think this is because we're black?" Nia whispered, her voice thick with frustration. Zara didn't answer right away. She didn't have to. They both knew. They had known it the moment Trevor refused to acknowledge them. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just bad service. It was something more. The weight of the situation was sinking in now. There was no escaping the truth. This wasn't just about a missed opportunity to board a plane. This was something bigger, something they were going to have to face whether they were ready or not. Have you ever been treated unfairly because of your appearance? Share your experience and let's talk about it. The moment Zara and Nia reach the TSA security checkpoint, something in the air shifts. The line is moving quickly, passengers breezing through with little to no hassle. But as the twins step up, the scene changes. The officer looks them over with a practiced gaze. Then, as if by instinct, signals for them to step aside. "Random selection for extra screening," the agent announces, though there's nothing random about the cold edge in her voice. The twins exchange a look. They've been here before. Too many times before. "Are you kidding me?" Nia mutters under her breath, but Zara places a hand on her arm to hold her back. "Just keep calm," she whispers, though her voice shakes. Zara knows that speaking out or reacting in anger will only escalate things. She's seen it happen too many times. They have to keep their heads down, keep calm, even when everything in their gut is screaming that something is terribly wrong. But this isn't just any screening. It's different. As they step through the metal detector, the agent waves them to the side. "Follow me." Zara swallows hard, the feeling of dread settling in the pit of her stomach. What's happening? Why them? The officer leads them to a separate line. Other passengers breeze through, their only interaction with TSA a polite nod or a quick scan of their tickets. But Zara and Nia? They're treated like they're guilty of something they can't even understand. The questioning begins. "What's in your bag?" The officer's voice is sharp, more of an accusation than a question. Zara feels the weight of her anxiety building, but she answers calmly. She's done this before. Always polite, always cooperative. But this time, the agent doesn't stop at the bags. She orders them to step aside again. And that's when it gets personal. They're not just being searched, they're being invaded. The officer begins rifling through their personal belongings, snatching at the neatly packed items in their bags, tearing through their clothes. Zara winces as the officer yanks her laptop from the bag, scraping it roughly along the table. "Careful, please," she protests, but her voice is barely above a whisper, her nerves fraying. This is their moment of vulnerability, and the agent doesn't care. The officer's hands are rough, too rough, and Zara knows it's not just about the procedure anymore. Nia watches, her eyes widening with disbelief. "What is this?" she asks, her voice rising as she sees the officer open a sealed envelope, spilling Zara's prescribed allergy medication onto the table. "What are these?" The officer's voice is accusing, as if they've somehow broken the rules, as if these girls, her girls, are somehow criminals. "They're my medications," Zara says, holding back the fury bubbling up inside her. "Fexofenadine, for my allergies." The officer ignores her. She places the pills aside, like they're evidence of a crime, before continuing her invasive search. Nia's blood begins to boil. This is too much. They were just here to board a plane, to go on a college visit, to live their lives. Why are they being treated like criminals? Why are they being treated like they don't belong here? "This is wrong," Nia says, the anger in her voice barely contained now. She turns to Zara, her eyes flashing. "I'm done with this. I'm done letting them do this to us." But Zara grabs her sister's arm, pulling her back. "No, Nia, we can't let them win," she says, her voice a whisper of resolve. "We can't let them use our anger against us. Stay calm. We'll get through this." Zara knows, deep down, that if they lose control now, if they show even a hint of frustration, or worse, anger, their treatment will be justified in the eyes of the people around them. She has to be the calm one. She has to be the voice of reason. But in that moment, standing there, humiliated and stripped of their dignity, Zara feels the pain of it all. The endless microaggressions, the way their humanity is questioned at every turn, not because they've done anything wrong, but simply because they are who they are. "Are you done yet?" Nia's voice breaks through Zara's thoughts. The officer hasn't answered, hasn't even acknowledged them. Instead, she's now pulling at their hair, examining their braids, as if they were something to be scrutinized, dissected. Zara can't breathe. Her chest tightens. She knows that right now, in front of everyone, surrounded by onlookers who are doing nothing, they're being treated as less than human, less than the passengers everyone else is. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, the officer finishes. They're allowed to move on, but not before a final cruel remark. "You should have known better," she says, her words heavy with something that feels like judgment. And just like that, the twins are dismissed, their belongings hastily repacked, their dignity still scattered across the table. Zara stands there, trembling, her heart pounding in her chest. The harsh fluorescent lights above seem to mock her, buzzing louder with every second that passes. Nia is standing beside her, visibly shaking with anger, her fists clenched. Their dignity, their sense of self has been stripped away in the most humiliating way possible. Zara feels the weight of it pressing down on her. They've endured this for far too long. First, it was Trevor at the gate, dismissing them as if they were invisible. Then it was the TSA agent, invading their privacy, treating them like criminals for no reason. It's always been like this, hasn't it? They're constantly reminded that they don't belong, at least not in the spaces they're entitled to, like everyone else. Zara can feel her sister's frustration building, but she knows they can't let this anger take over. They've been taught time and time again to hold it in, to stay calm no matter how unfair it is, to rise above. But this time, Zara can't hold back anymore. "I can't do this," Zara mutters under her breath. Nia looks at her with wide eyes, not understanding what Zara means. Zara pulls out her phone, her fingers shaking as she dials the number she knows by heart. "What are you doing?" Nia asks, her voice tight. Zara doesn't answer immediately, her thumb hovering over the call button. She knows what this means. She knows what it could cost them. But she's had enough. The endless microaggressions, the discrimination that's so ingrained in the system that it's almost invisible. They've been pushed to the edge, and this time, they're not going to back down. "Dad," Zara finally says, her voice shaky but resolute, "we need you."
What Zara doesn't know, what neither of them realizes, is that their father is no ordinary man. Marcus Jackson, the man they call for help, isn't just a concerned parent trying to sort out a travel mishap. He's the newly appointed CEO of Mid-Atlantic Airlines, the very airline they're struggling with. The weight of this moment hasn't yet hit Zara. She's unaware that dialing her father's number is about to spark a chain reaction that will change everything. Not just for her and Nia, but for an entire industry. "Dad, we're being treated like criminals," Zara says, the words tumbling out in a rush now that she's finally speaking to him. "We're stuck here, humiliated. They won't let us board the flight, and I don't know what to do anymore." Marcus Jackson's voice on the other end is calm, but there's an undeniable authority in his tone. "Zara," he says, his voice steady, "tell me exactly what happened. I'll take care of this." Zara's heart skips a beat. She had no idea that her father's role in the airline was more than just a job. He's a man with the power to make things right in ways she could never have imagined. "I need you to trust me," Marcus continues, his voice unwavering. "You're not going to deal with this alone. Stay where you are and don't move until I say so." And with those words, everything changes. What started as a routine phone call to a father turns into the beginning of something far bigger. Marcus Jackson isn't just a concerned dad anymore. He's the CEO of Mid-Atlantic Airlines.
Zara and Nia have no idea what's coming next. They don't realize that in mere moments, the very airline that's been causing them pain will be rocked to its core. Marcus Jackson isn't just going to make a call to the customer service department or try to smooth things over with a polite email. No, Marcus has something far more powerful in mind. He's about to unleash a move that will send shockwaves through the airline industry, a move that will not only expose the deep-seated issues within Mid-Atlantic, but will change the way the company and the world thinks about power, racism, and what happens when you push someone too far. "Emergency Protocol Alpha," Marcus orders, his voice cold and precise. "Ground every plane, effective immediately." Zara's jaw drops as she hears the words over the phone, but she can't fully grasp what they mean yet. "What are you doing, Dad?" she asks, her voice shaking, the confusion rising in her chest. Marcus's response is a cold, calculated command. "I'm grounding every single flight. Every plane. There's no going back now."
And just like that, Marcus Jackson, the CEO of Mid-Atlantic Airlines, sets into motion an unprecedented response to the discrimination his daughters have faced. Every flight in the air is grounded. Over 300 planes, 42,000 passengers, and a corporate empire shaken to its core. The ripple effect is immediate. News outlets begin reporting on the grounding. Investors panic. The corporate board of Mid-Atlantic scrambles. But no one can ignore the message Marcus is sending. This kind of discrimination will not be tolerated. Not on his watch, and certainly not by his family. Zara and Nia stand there, stunned, still processing what's unfolding. They had no idea what calling their father would set into motion. But as they stand there in the terminal, they can feel the weight of it. What they didn't know when they first dialed the number, what they didn't know when they were just two college-bound girls trying to board a plane, is that their lives were about to change forever. The phone call has barely ended when Marcus Jackson takes a deep breath. The weight of what he's about to do presses on him, but there's no turning back. He stands tall in his office, the city skyline a blur outside the window. His hand hovers over the phone, but it's not just any phone call. This is the kind of call that could change everything.
Emergency Protocol Alpha, Marcus says firmly into the receiver, his voice a quiet but unmistakable declaration of war. Ground every flight, every single one, effective immediately. The words hang in the air, charged with power. The operator on the other end of the line doesn't hesitate. She's heard Marcus's voice before, heard it in board meetings and through company-wide directives. This, though, this is different. This is personal. The kind of decision that ripples through the entire company and affects every part of the airline's operations. The kind of decision that could bring the company to its knees if the consequences aren't handled right. "Understood, Mr. Jackson," the operator responds, her voice steady but tinged with disbelief. And just like that, the entire mid-Atlantic fleet comes to a screeching halt. The ramifications are immediate, breathtaking, and far-reaching. Over 300 planes, 42,000 passengers, and the entire airline's operations are suspended, grounded in a single sweeping decision. The moment it's announced, the ripple effect is felt not just within Mid-Atlantic, but across the entire airline industry. In the span of seconds, the silence that fills the terminals of airports around the country is deafening. Passengers, who had once been oblivious to the inner workings of their flight, now found themselves stranded, confused, and scrambling for answers. Flight attendants and ground crews who were just minutes away from taking off are left standing idle, staring at the flight boards that now read, "Canceled," in bold, red letters. The media catches wind of the news, quickly broadcasting Marcus Jackson's unprecedented move. Reporters swarm the airports, microphones and cameras in hand, asking passengers what they know, what's happening, and why. Across the airwaves, the buzz grows louder. Inside the boardroom of Mid-Atlantic Airlines, the chaos is escalating. Executives are on their phones, shouting at each other, scrambling to find out why their planes have been grounded. Investors begin calling in panic. Stock prices plummet. The company is in crisis mode, but no one can get through to Marcus Jackson. Marcus stands at the helm of it all, calm but resolute. He knew this wouldn't be easy. He knew this decision would send shockwaves through the airline industry. But he also knew something more. He knew that this was bigger than just a case of two teenagers being humiliated at an airport. This was about something much larger. This was about the deep-seated, systemic issues that have been allowed to thrive unchecked for far too long. This was about corporate power and the way it has protected its own while marginalizing those who need it most.
The clock ticks by, and the tension mounts. Marcus Jackson is in the midst of a high-stakes battle. He's not just trying to protect his family. He's trying to dismantle a culture of complacency, a corporate structure that allows discrimination to run rampant behind closed doors. The decision he's made to ground the entire airline isn't a reckless one. It's calculated. This is about more than just a single instance of racial profiling. This is a reckoning for an entire industry that has failed to address its flaws. An industry that has allowed passengers like Zara and Nia and countless others to feel powerless, invisible, and less than human.
As the news spreads and the chaos continues, Marcus Jackson doesn't flinch. He knows the battle won't be easy. Mid-Atlantic Airlines is a giant in the industry, and dismantling the culture of discrimination that has taken root there will require more than just a change in policy. It will take a complete overhaul. But Marcus is ready to fight that fight. He's ready to face down the powers that be and make them reckon with the reality that their business practices have created a system that has turned a blind eye to injustice. This is about power. It's about the kind of power that can change an entire industry. It's about using that power not for personal gain, but to level the playing field for those who have been marginalized for too long.
For Zara and Nia, this is just the beginning. What started as an innocent college visit has now set into motion a series of events that will forever change their lives and the way the world sees the system of power that controls the skies. What happens next will send shockwaves through the entire world of corporate America. And it all started with a phone call from a father, standing up not just for his daughters, but for what is right. The storm is about to hit. The storm had only just begun. As soon as Marcus Jackson's decision to ground every Mid-Atlantic Airlines flight reverberated through the company's corridors, the executives began to scramble, their calm facades cracking under the pressure. The high-rise offices of corporate headquarters, once calm and collected, now buzzed with frantic phone calls and desperate strategy sessions. The crisis was unprecedented, and so was the response. Victor Harrington, a longtime board member and a staunch protector of the status quo, was one of the first to react. His face was flushed with anger as he paced the boardroom, phone pressed tightly to his ear. He knew exactly what this would mean: a catastrophic blow to the company's reputation and a hit to its stock price. What Marcus had done, shutting down operations without a second thought, was bold, but it was also dangerous. For Victor, it was an opportunity to seize control. "We need to shift the narrative," Victor muttered, his voice low, almost guttural, as he spoke to a group of other board members. "This isn't about racism or injustice. This is about corporate stability. We need to remind the public that Marcus has acted rashly."
Victor was a master manipulator, and he knew exactly how to frame the situation to protect his interests. He immediately started spinning the story, talking to reporters, leaking details about Marcus's impulsive decision and how it had caused chaos across the country. In his eyes, the grounding of the entire fleet wasn't about standing up for justice. It was about an executive gone rogue, a CEO making unilateral decisions without consulting the board. He was crafting a new narrative, one where Marcus was the villain and Victor could be the hero who saved the company from collapse. Meanwhile, as the executives played their games of corporate chess, trying to maintain their grip on power, the twins were focused on something entirely different. Zara and Nia had spent their lives observing, learning from the world around them. They knew that in a system so rooted in power and privilege, the only way to be heard was to fight back with the one thing that could expose the truth: evidence. The twins were no strangers to the battlefield of injustice. Over the years, they had witnessed countless microaggressions and subtle forms of discrimination, things people around them often brushed off as just the way things are. But they knew better. They'd learned early on that silence was never the answer. If they wanted to make a difference, they had to take matters into their own hands. They couldn't wait for the system to recognize their worth. They had to force it to see them.
Zara, with her tech-savvy mind and Nia's sharp instincts, had been quietly documenting everything since their first encounter at the gate. It wasn't just the way Trevor had treated them at check-in. It was the TSA agent's invasive pat-down. It was the humiliation they faced at every turn. They knew it wasn't enough to simply be angry. They had to be strategic.
"We need to gather everything," Zara said, as she typed furiously on her phone, pulling up footage she had secretly recorded of Trevor at the gate and the entire interaction with TSA. Every moment, every word, every glance, it all counts. Nia nodded, her face hardening with resolve. "We've been through enough. It's time they see us, see exactly what they did." The twins had learned that evidence was their weapon. They had seen what happened to people who spoke out without proof, how their words were twisted and ignored. But with a camera, with receipts, with hard facts, they could force the world to listen. The twins began gathering everything they could. Zara carefully archived their footage and screenshots from social media, while Nia reached out to other passengers who had witnessed the events, passengers who had overheard the conversations, anyone who could corroborate their story. As they worked, they grew more focused. This wasn't just about getting on a flight anymore. This was about something far bigger. This was about exposing the truth of what had happened to them and forcing Mid-Atlantic Airlines to confront the ugly reality of its systemic discrimination.
Meanwhile, back at corporate headquarters, the board members were beginning to feel the heat. Victor had managed to spin the narrative to his advantage, but cracks were beginning to show. The company's public relations team scrambled to handle the media frenzy, but the damage was done. Stock prices were plummeting, customers were angry, and investors were demanding answers. It was only a matter of time before the public started asking tougher questions. And that's when the twins struck. Zara and Nia had done their homework. They had compiled the footage, the statements, the screenshots. They had documented every detail, every instance of mistreatment. They had evidence of Trevor's behavior, they had the TSA footage, and they had the receipts for their first-class tickets. All of it was there, irrefutable, unrefutable proof that they had been wronged. The twins weren't just making noise anymore, they were making waves. They were preparing to go public, hitting every news outlet, every social media platform, and every legal channel they could. It was time to take their fight to the next level. The stage was set for a showdown. While the executives at Mid-Atlantic tried to contain the fallout, the twins were gearing up for battle. They weren't just two teenage girls with a complaint anymore. They were the tip of a much larger iceberg, the embodiment of everything that was wrong with the airline industry's treatment of people of color.
Marcus Jackson, too, was preparing for the inevitable battle that would come once the full scope of his decision became clear. But the twins, now armed with evidence, were ready to hold the company accountable in a way it had never seen before. They had learned the most important lesson of all. In a world where power often goes unchecked, the truth is the only thing that can break the system wide open. And they were about to make sure that truth was heard. The twins knew they couldn't leave any stone unturned. Every moment, every detail, every interaction, nothing could be forgotten. They were in the midst of something far bigger than a routine complaint. Zara and Nia understood the stakes now. This wasn't just about being humiliated at an airport. This was about dismantling the system that had been working against them their entire lives. Zara, with her keen technical skills, took the lead. She wasn't just gathering evidence, she was compiling an arsenal. With every picture, every video, every note, she was building their case, piece by piece. Each file was a weapon in a war they were determined to win. Nia watched as her sister worked tirelessly, her fingers flying over her phone and laptop, connecting dots, creating folders, organizing evidence in a way that could never be ignored. "We need to make sure this is airtight," Zara said, her voice low but steady. She was already pulling up footage from the TSA encounter, the invasive pat-down, the cold treatment from the agents.
She had captured the entire ordeal, her camera steady as the humiliation unfolded.
"Let me grab the video from the gate," Nia said, pulling her phone out of her bag. She had recorded Trevor's dismissive actions, the way he had made them wait endlessly before finally deciding to check their tickets. She even had shots of the rude comments he'd made, the way he had assumed they didn't belong in first class. Every angle, every moment, all caught on tape. Zara nodded, scrolling through the footage. "We've got everything we need. We just have to make sure we've got witnesses." They weren't just relying on their own recordings. They were reaching out to the other passengers who had been in line with them at the gate, who had seen how they were treated. They contacted people who had seen the TSA agent humiliate them. They needed backup. They needed voices that could verify what had happened. Every witness was a vital piece of the puzzle. Zara wasn't leaving anything to chance. She backed up every file, stored it on cloud drives, and encrypted everything to make sure that no one could erase their evidence. The twins weren't naive. They knew that Mid-Atlantic would stop at nothing to bury the truth. It was a massive corporation with power, influence, and resources that could make this all disappear in an instant. But what they didn't know was that Zara and Nia weren't going to let that happen. The tension was palpable. Zara's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her thoughts racing. They had all the evidence they needed, but there was still something lingering in the back of her mind. What if Mid-Atlantic tried to dismiss their story? What if they tried to discredit them, say their footage was fabricated or altered? What if they came after them for what they were about to do? "We can't just post this online, Nia," Zara said, her voice tense. "We need to make sure we're doing this the right way." Nia's expression hardened. "I know. We need to go public, but we have to make sure it's undeniable. This isn't just about our story anymore. It's about what they did to us and so many others. This is bigger than us." They both knew this wasn't just about them anymore. The moment they made this public, it would become a fight for accountability, a fight to hold Mid-Atlantic Airlines and every institution that allowed this kind of treatment to flourish accountable. They couldn't be afraid. They couldn't back down. The twins understood that their battle was not just against one airline. It was against a system that had failed them and countless others for too long. The moment they hit send, there would be no turning back. Zara uploaded the video to the platform she had carefully chosen. Nia drafted the post, laying out the full scope of what had happened to them at the airport. They told the story of their humiliation, their mistreatment, and their decision to stand up and expose the truth. They included the evidence, photos, video clips, witness statements, all laid out for the world to see.
"Ready?" Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her thumb hovering over the post button. "Ready," Nia replied, her jaw clenched. With a single tap, they shared their story. And with that one click, the digital war had begun. The response was immediate. The story spread like wildfire across social media, gaining traction faster than they could have imagined. People began to share their coast. News outlets picked up the story. Bloggers, influencers, and civil rights activists rallied behind them. The evidence was irrefutable. The truth was out. And Mid-Atlantic Airlines? They were scrambling. The PR team worked overtime, releasing statements attempting to downplay the severity of the situation. The board members, who had been so confident in their ability to control the narrative, found themselves in a corner. They couldn't ignore the video. They couldn't pretend it didn't exist. The evidence was there, clear for everyone to see. And the twins weren't stopping. Every interview, every conversation they had about their experience, they made sure to emphasize one thing. It wasn't just about them. It wasn't just about two girls being denied boarding. It was about a system that had allowed this to happen time and time again, a system that had allowed corporate power to overrun common decency. They were fighting for everyone who had ever been made to feel less than. The tension was reaching a boiling point. The digital war had shifted the balance of power. No longer was Mid-Atlantic in control of the story. They had lost the narrative, and it was now in the hands of those who had been silenced for too long. Zara and Nia had become the voices for the countless others who had faced discrimination in silence. This is where things get interesting. Imagine the power of digital evidence in the fight for justice. How can we use tech to expose the truth? Let's talk about how we can all use our voices and our platforms to demand accountability. The dust had barely settled when the first signs of change began to unfold. What had started as a single, powerful act of resistance, Marcus Jackson's decision to ground the entire fleet, was now becoming something much bigger. The message had been loud and clear. Mid-Atlantic Airlines could no longer operate under the shield of systemic injustice. Marcus stood in his office overlooking the sprawling city below as the weight of what he had set in motion settled over him. His phone rang again, and he picked it up without hesitation. This time, it wasn't about fighting the fire. It was about putting out the flames and rebuilding what had been broken. "We've made the announcement," his PR team reported. "We're officially instituting new anti-discrimination policies. The first phase of training starts next week." Marcus nodded. "It's not enough to just train. We need systemic change. We need accountability at every level of the company. From the hiring process to promotions to how we treat our passengers. Everything needs to be examined. We need new reporting systems, a safe space for anyone to report unfair treatment, and a commitment to action."
"Understood," the team responded, the gravity of his words sinking in. "We're already drafting new protocols, including mandatory diversity training for all employees and stricter oversight of hiring practices." The conversation was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Mid-Atlantic Airlines went into overdrive, implementing a sweeping series of reforms designed to address the deep-rooted biases that had permeated the company. It wasn't just about firing the gate agents or TSA personnel involved in the incident with the twins. It was about dismantling the structures that allowed discrimination to thrive unchecked. Anti-discrimination training wasn't just a checkbox on a corporate list. It was a complete overhaul of how the airline operated. Leadership from the top down was re-educated on racial bias, privilege, and inclusion. Training sessions weren't limited to just employees in customer-facing roles. Everyone, engineers, pilots, senior executives, was required to engage in conversations about equality, empathy, and structural reform. The company also implemented a new system for hiring and promotions that prioritized diversity, ensuring that the people being elevated within the company were not just qualified, but also committed to fighting against systemic inequity. Mid-Atlantic also set up a revolutionary reporting system, one that could no longer be easily ignored or swept under the rug. Employees and passengers alike now had a direct line to report discrimination, and the company made it clear that retaliation against whistleblowers would not be tolerated.
Marcus Jackson's leadership, once seen as the figurehead of a corporate empire, was now being lauded for something more. He was seen as a man who took bold, uncompromising action, not just to fix the immediate problem, but to ensure that the airline and the world around it never reverted to the same flawed system. For Zara and Nia, the changes were more than just a corporate shift. They had set something monumental into motion, something that would reverberate beyond their individual experience. But even as the reforms were being implemented, they knew that this victory, though sweet, was just the beginning. The day they boarded their next flight, everything felt different. The airport that once seemed like a battleground now felt almost unrecognizable. As they approached the gate, the same agent who had once dismissed them with barely a glance now smiled warmly at them. Good afternoon, ladies. Your flight is ready for boarding. Welcome back. Zara and Nia exchanged a look, their faces reflecting a mixture of relief and quiet triumph. This time, they weren't just being allowed to board a flight. This time, they were being treated with the respect and dignity they deserved. It wasn't just a seat on an airplane. It was a seat at the table, a symbol of a battle won and a shift in the system.
But they both knew this moment of peace was fleeting. They had won this battle, yes, but the larger fight was far from over. Zara squeezed her sister's hand as they made their way onto the plane. "We did it," Nia said, her voice filled with a mixture of exhaustion and pride. "We're just getting started," Zara replied, a quiet resolve in her voice. "This victory is for everyone who's been treated like we have. But there's more to do. The fight for real change is still out there." As they settled into their seats, the noise of the busy airport faded behind them, and for the first time in a long while, the twins allowed themselves to just breathe. They had taken on a corporate giant, and they had won. But more importantly, they had inspired a movement that was bigger than themselves. A movement that was calling for accountability, for respect, and for a world where everyone, no matter their skin color or background, had the right to be treated with dignity. The flight took off, but Zara and Nia weren't just heading to Boston anymore. They were heading into the next chapter of their lives, one where they knew their voices mattered and where they had the power to make lasting, systemic change. The victory was sweet, but the real fight was still on the horizon. And Zara and Nia were ready.
It was supposed to be a simple trip, a rite of passage for every high school senior, the journey to visit colleges, to imagine a future beyond the familiar. For Zara and Nia, this wasn't just about picking the right school. It was about stepping into the next phase of their lives. It was meant to be an adventure of excitement and possibility. But what began as a simple plane ride to Boston became something far larger than they ever imagined. In the blink of an eye, their entire world had changed. No longer just two ambitious young women looking forward to their futures, Zara and Nia had become the faces of something bigger, something that would go on to challenge the very systems that had kept people like them at the margins for too long. They had set out to explore new opportunities, but they were now at the forefront of a movement that was shaking the foundations of corporate America. The road to change had been anything but easy. From the moment they were dismissed by the gate agent at Mid-Atlantic Airlines, the twins knew something was off. They had felt it in their bones. This wasn't just bad service. This was something more, something insidious. And the harder they tried to stay calm, the more they realized that their calmness was being used against them.
As the days went by, what started as a confrontation between two teenagers and a gate agent turned into an unyielding fight for dignity. The mistreatment, the invasive TSA search, the humiliation, these weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a much larger issue, a culture that had long been allowed to thrive unchecked. And in the face of it all, Zara and Nia had done what no one expected. They fought back. Their strategy was simple but powerful. Evidence. They gathered every piece of documentation they could, every photo, every video, every witness statement. What started as a personal battle against injustice became a larger campaign to expose the very systemic racism that was built into the fabric of the airline. And when they made the decision to go public, when they released that video and shared their story with the world, they sparked a revolution. Marcus Jackson, their father, had always been more than just a concerned parent. He was a leader, someone with the power to change the system from within. His decision to ground Mid-Atlantic Airlines' entire fleet sent shockwaves through the corporate world. The airline, which had long turned a blind eye to the discriminatory practices hidden beneath its polished exterior, was now forced to reckon with the damage it had done. But it didn't stop there. The reforms that followed, the systemic changes in hiring, promotions, and anti-discrimination policies, were just the beginning. They had started something that could not be undone. And yet, even as Zara and Nia boarded their flight to Boston, finally greeted by a warm, respectful gate agent, they knew that their victory wasn't the end. Far from it.
"It's not over yet," Zara whispered to Nia as they settled into their seats. The plane began to taxi down the runway, and the noise of the engines drowned out their words for a moment. But Nia nodded, understanding exactly what her sister meant. This wasn't just about two teenage girls getting a seat on a flight. It was about something bigger. It was about the fight for fairness, for a future where discrimination would no longer be allowed to fester beneath the surface. The reality was stark. The battle they had fought was part of a much larger struggle that spanned far beyond Mid-Atlantic Airlines. The ripple effects of their actions were being felt across the airline industry, across corporate America, and beyond. Their voices had ignited a movement, one that had the potential to change industries, workplaces, and the way society viewed race, power, and privilege. But the question lingered heavy in the air. Would this moment become a turning point? Would others follow Marcus Jackson's lead? Or would they remain stuck in the past, clinging to systems that perpetuated inequality and discrimination?
As Zara and Nia's plane soared into the sky, they reflected on the journey that had brought them here. What had begun as a simple personal injustice had evolved into a force that challenged the very structures that held inequality in place. Their fight wasn't just for their own dignity. It was for every person who had ever been mistreated, ignored, or erased. And they knew, deep down, that their fight was far from over. The question now wasn't whether Mid-Atlantic Airlines would change. It was whether the world, corporate and otherwise, would follow suit. Would the powerful system that had allowed injustice to flourish continue to shield itself, or would this moment mark the beginning of something more profound? Zara and Nia may have won their personal battle, but the war for equality, for justice, and for systemic change was just beginning. They were no longer just students on a college tour. They were leaders in a movement that was rewriting the rules. And as they looked out the window of their plane, they knew that this journey was only the beginning of something that would impact generations to come. Zara and Nia's fight wasn't just about one airline. It's about creating a world where discrimination doesn't have a place. What steps can we take to ensure this fight doesn't end with one victory? How can we continue pushing for systemic change? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's make sure this movement continues. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.